So thank you for joining this panel. So this panel is organized by the Institut Europe IA. I'm sure you're all familiar with Institut Europe IA. They are the creator of this conference, WAICF. And Institut Europe IA was actually founded and now is chaired by Marco Landi. Marco Landi was the COO of Apple, and he just wrote a book which was introduced last night, and the book was introduced, prefaced by by Luc Julia, you all know. So, and this Institut Europe IA, the remit of this institute is to bring the human side ethics into AI and into automation. And Institut Europe IA, they have experts from all domains like arts, education, and anything you can think of, security, and they have one person in charge representing the CFOs, the finance directors, and it's me. So that's why today we have this panel about AI for finance, for CFOs and in the finance function. So my name is Armand Angeli. I am the vice president of the French CFO Association called DFCG, and I am the vice president in charge of all automation, AI, and shared services or digital transformation. And I do the same thing for the International CFO Association, which is the federation of associations called ICFOA. So that's what I'm doing. And of course, it's all pro bono, and you can all join. We want to exchange between CFOs. So, and joining me today is David, who is going to introduce himself.
My name is David Ray. Thank you, Armand. Basically, just to give you a little bit of background, I've spent more years than I care to admit to. You can probably tell by my hair that I've been in CFO-related roles, mostly in technology and telco industries. More recently, I've actually spent quite a bit of time looking at the convergence of the finance function and sustainability, and how do CFOs respond to that, how do companies deal with that, and then where does technology play a role in that? So that's just to give you a little bit of a sense. Technically, I'm here under the International CFO Alliance, as Armand said. I'm not only a board member representing France for them, but I also chair their ESG group. And I think, as Armand said, if any of you are interested, please do come and talk to us afterwards. We'd love to have new members.
Yeah, whether in France or anywhere almost in the world.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, Wouter, who are you?
Yes. So, hi everyone. My name is Wouter van Beek. I'm working at Air France KLM. I think you all know the company. Myself, I have a finance background. In the past few years, actually, I have been working more on the transformation and innovation side. During COVID, the company was hit very hard, as you probably all can imagine. And initially, the focus was on the restructuring and sort of turnaround of Air France and also the other airlines in the group. And you see, really, in the past few years, that the focus has become much more also on technology-driven solutions, of which AI is taking a very prominent place. So I'm looking forward to share with you a bit what we have been doing at Air France and KLM with regards to technology, AI, and generative AI.
Thank you. Raphael?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raphael Saval. I'm the CFO for Velida. Those who knows Velida? You raise the hand. Okay, a few people. So great. So Velida is a medium-sized company headquartered in Switzerland, founded 100 years ago by a Dutch compatriot, Ita Wegman, a medical doctor, one of the first one, so 100 years ago. And we are a pharma and beauty company. And we are very human-centric. So our mission is to bring health and beauty in harmony with nature. And I would say that, this has been kind of a hype in the past 10 or 20 years, but we have been at it for the past 20 years, the past 100 years. So, it's our mission to bring the goodness of nature. And I've been the CFO in charge of digital transformation as well, legal, and IT.
Thank you, Raphael. Okay, since you have the mic, Raphael, so as a CFO, what keeps you awake at night? So what are your priorities or what for the year?
Yes, thank you, Armand. So nothing. I sleep very well. No, in terms of priorities, I think it's like any CFO, and I repeat that again and again. It's deliver the results quarter by quarter. And to be fair, Veleda was not used to actually be very performance-driven. So we are changing that. So delivering the results. And I'm here as well because digitalization and modernization of the company is very important. Veleda has been created from the onset as an international company. So very early on, Ita Wegman, this wonderful woman, created affiliates in the US, in New Zealand, in Australia. So we've got an international company, but it's still managed and organized like an independent federation. So my mission, what's keep me a bit more awake, is how do we make it a modern group with modern tools, modern process, but at the same time how we keep the heritage of those 100 years and this human centricity that we want to keep.
Okay, so and to do your digital transformation, to drive the business, do you already use AI, Gen AI, or or automation? Because it's this business is so broad. I mean, and we put AI, the AI word everywhere, but sometimes it covers lots.
Yeah. So it's been a bit taboo. It's been a bit taboo because what we have started to use, what Veleda started to implement is robots, right? And just imagine a company that is very human-centric, starting to talk about robots to automatize work doesn't get a great rep, right? And so we are in some way relaunching, this effort, but we want to make it very, human-centric. We want to launch it more as a tool, right, that allows our employees to actually be more productive. So we have initiatives that we have launched since about 6 months to bring Gen AI, but it's more about getting the technology so that people can really use it, that we can have use cases, and that we can little by little get full buying, right?
Okay, so some RPA, I guess, and some AI, Gen AI. Okay, how about you, Wouter? So what do you do in terms of what keeps you? I mean, I'm sure you sleep very well, but once you are awake, what do you do?
Okay. So maybe first about AI. So there was a report from McKinsey out last year, and if you see there, I think a couple of industries which they walk through, and clearly the transportation industry is one of the industries which will be is assumed to be most affected by potentially by this AI technology when it comes to productivity, the way people work. So we have taken this very serious from start. For sure, we see that potential. We believe that up to 70% of jobs could be potentially affected by artificial intelligence, but it also comes with responsibilities and concerns from social our social partners, our employees. So yeah, what keeps you awake at night? Like I can tell you a little bit later about our journey of AI, of how we define the strategy, how we set that governance. But I think particularly about that governance piece, what is absolutely crucial for us is, of course, the quality of data, the security of data. Think about the GDPR of personal records, safety, a major concern. So for that, in terms of governance, we have put a number of measures in place that start with a clear defined organization, data, and AI. Myself, I'm and the team, we are more on the business side, but there is a technical side there as well. We have put in place a AI ethics charter. We have taken additional security measures with regards to what can be, which data and which kind of use cases do we really want to run on-premise, or we can do more in a public cloud. We clearly defined what we can do with WAF. It's about, we have an AI charter, an AI register. If anyone of you is interested, I can share a bit more in detail this kind of thing. But I think this is for us absolutely crucial to make sure that no major mistakes happen. And even then, as you said, what keeps you awake at night? I still have concerns sometimes about what comes out of the AI models we're currently running and training. But I also see definitely very positive potential out there.
David.
Same question?
How about you?
It's a good question. So I think maybe I'll be a little bit provocative. I won't repeat because I agree with what my fellow panelists have said. But where I'm concerned is on two fronts. One is when you look at companies and you look at the leaders of organizations, in many organizations, there's a reluctance to embrace the movement towards a sustainable business. Right? You hear a lot of things like it's expensive, it's difficult, it's going to create a competitive disadvantage, particularly for companies in Europe. They're going to be held to a pretty significant standard with CSRD, and there isn't that equivalent necessarily in other geographies. So you can see the natural concern, and part of what I'm working through with CFOs and really the challenge, I think, is how do you instill the mindset of actually being a sustainable business is incredibly profitable. You just have to think differently about what you do and how you do it. So that's one of the things that I think for me is really important. And I think when it comes to technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or anything else, it's how it's being used. And there's this rush, and I think we've seen it with ChatGPT, and you probably all can think of examples, where ChatGPT became the greatest thing. And all of a sudden, people started putting company confidential data into the chatbot saying, hey, I've got this problem, help me. And all of a sudden, you've now got this confidential data that's out in a public domain and is being consumed. That's one issue. But then even beyond that, there's no rigor around testing what comes out. And I don't know if you'll remember this. There was a case, I believe it was in Manhattan last year. Fascinating case. Lawyer ended up going to court, had used ChatGPT for case precedent, saying, find me case precedent on this set of the facts. ChatGPT came back with case precedent. They sounded brilliant. Not one case of what was recommended was actually a real case. So you had this perspective or this perception of, this is entirely reliable. I'm actually going to court and I'm going to use it. And clearly it didn't go very well. The lawyer ended up not winning the case. And that's just one example of what ends up happening. Or it's the use of AI, for example, and how does it influence political discourse? Or how does it influence strategic discourse in a company when there's some reliability issues around it? So that's why I say I'll be a little bit provocative, because I think it's easy to get excited about the technology, but it's much harder to start thinking about use of it, the ethics around it. So I think when we hear about the KLM Air France case around the governance strategy, those things are really important, and they're not sexy. So to go to a CEO and say, you know what, we need to put this in place, the CEO says, we need to innovate. And we heard that a little bit earlier with the minister, Bruno Le Maire. And you hear that and you think there's a balance between innovation and doing it properly. And I'm not sure that we've found that balance yet. And I think that's true in companies, just like it's true in the public domain. So those are just some different perspectives on what concern me, and I think we need to talk through a little bit more.
I think at this point you should maybe explain what you do with the Sustainability Board, and also you mentioned CSRD. I'm not sure everybody is aware about CSRD, and so what's going on, what's coming up, and why are the CFOs involved? Should they be involved? How much responsible are they?
All good questions. So by show of hands, and hopefully the lights won't blind me too much, how many of you know nothing at all about CSRD? Okay, so a few of you. If you're in finance roles or in sustainability roles, I'm a little concerned. If you're not, totally normal. So CSRD basically is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive for Europe. And it sets out how companies need to report on matters of environmental topics, social topics, and governance topics. It goes further than any other law anywhere else in the world. And again, you can argue the merits of right or wrong. We can get into that perhaps on a separate conversation over a nice glass of wine. But that's what it is. And companies are having to comply with that extremely soon. So companies are going through this, and it affects about 50,000 companies, just to give you some sense of scale in Europe. Mostly large companies or interests, companies that are of public interest. So they might be privately held, but they're still considered public interest entities. And it's this management of change around, and I'll just be honest with you and candid with you, what I hear a lot is, well, one, where do I get the data? Two, how do I actually assess my material risks? Because you have to assess what's material to you as a company. And what's fascinating is CFOs, for example, are saying, but climate's actually not a risk to my business. And I think most organizations, it doesn't matter what spectrum you fall on around your beliefs or not around climate change, it's really hard to imagine a company not recognizing that every company on the planet is affected by climate change. Everyone. Whether it's water, whether it's access to human capital, for example. And by the way, there's a very real connection between environmental related matters and social matters. You start thinking about if you've got an impact potentially in an area of the world where you're doing business, and let's say the climate's changing, there are more natural disasters. We've all seen the news last year of a variety of events that happened that were anomalous. They were called, I think, once-in-a-lifetime events. Are they? Don't know. And that's what CFOs have to start thinking about. And that's where CSRD gives a structure for how to go about doing it. And then there's another directive that I know you're going to ask me about, so I'll preempt it. That's called it's called, what's?
CS3D.
It's 3D, isn't it? Is the CSDDD, which just basically means it's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So in other words, it's saying, hey, I'll give you a very simple example. It's not enough anymore to put a clause in a contract with a supplier to say, you will not use forced labor. Yes, you should do that. Don't get me wrong. That needs to be in the contract. But it's not enough to rely on that clause to say, I've done my due diligence. I put that in there. It's their responsibility. The due diligence directive moves that responsibility back to the company to say, what did you do to check? How did you get comfortable that that's in fact the case? How did you assess the risk of that supplier, either by industry, country, or whatever the case may be? So those are some of the things that we're talking about in the International CFO Alliance and really talking to organizations about how they start to tackle these really big problems that go well beyond reporting. Because I'll share with you my last philosophy, and I'll hand it back to Armand, is my philosophy is very simple. And again, here it'll be a little bit provocative. If companies do the right thing, they do the right thing by people, they do the right thing by the planet, think about how resources are being consumed, think about the effect that they're having, and just being responsible. As all of us, by the way, as consumers need to think about our impact on the planet. We're no different. If companies start doing that, the reporting will be easy. Why? Because they'll be doing it. It's difficult because a lot of companies are not doing it. So yes, of course, this management of change feels momentous. So I really do challenge CFOs to start thinking about, maybe I need to change the way I think about it and have it embedded as part of my business, and it just becomes business as normal. And it's not this big thing anymore. Like AI, for example, or transformation, it's just normal now, right? Because we've been doing it for so long. But do you remember back at the beginning, you used to think, oh, this is massive change. And people were panicking about AI, all kinds of automation, taking my job's going somewhere else. And now we've seen it normalize, and we've seen actually there's a benefit, but it's then embracing that experience in this particular journey as well.
Thank you. So, Wouter, what do you do to comply with all these rules? Can you give us some examples in your business?
No, so absolutely. For example, the CSRD is for us a major topic. We are I think 24 is already that we have to mandatory report. So we have over 300 KPIs being tracked on that end. Also there we have committed to SBTi targets. So with emission reduction, relative emission reductions in the next years ahead of us. So we have built quite complex forecasting models. So these CRDs, they're actually tracking your actual emissions, your footprint, and then more forward-looking. So we have extensive models trying to do predictive forecasting of what exactly our let's say emissions. 90% is of course coming from the airplanes, from the aircrafts. We have new fleet coming in with cleaner engines, with less noise footprint, but that has to be let's say complemented by sustainable aviation fuels, where we are also there trying to put commitments in place. So, and there also on the technology side for that predictive forecasting, we have a long history actually at Air France and KLM of using machine learning, AI, already for optimization problems, and we're also using this. We have a department, operational research department, making use of this kind of machine learning to constantly refine and fine tune this kind of predictions to our needs in terms of sustainability. Yeah, let's say different measures to manage that footprint. When it comes to generative AI, so actually to really create new content. The other one is more to predict, to help you optimize decision making. So what we do with generative AI at the moment is we have a number of clear pillars where we use it. So on one hand, you have, for example, the chatbots generating automated responses to all kind of incoming questions. We have a private instance where we, for example, put our, for example, within finance, but also HR, we put for internal employees our all our manuals, accounting manuals, all our regulations with regards to working conditions, and then expert users. But even the next step is that every employee within the company would have access to that. So if they have any inquiries, they don't have to go anymore to a physical person, but will get accurate information based on let's say these uploaded documents, where we put that's the ChatGPT instance of Azure in between. Then I think another major pillar for us is on the customer servicing. So whenever people have questions with regards to flight reservations, claims after a flight, we use and we have many use cases in the making of putting AI at work there for translating voice to text when it comes to those, so that you have a summary of what has been discussed, to have prompted auto replies. And another fourth major pillar, what we're currently working on is on the IT side. It's the support with in terms of coding. It's one of the significant expenditures we have we have a whole innovation budget where we believe that by making use of AI, Copilot, eventually we can significantly improve the output of our IT developers. So we're building use cases around those pillars. Also within the finance domain, for the CFOs, I can explain to you a little bit later if we have more time. We have a number of use cases running, like the example I gave on the manuals, but basically within every aspect of the finance functions, we see potential use cases, and there are different maturity stages. But if you want, I can explain you a little bit later more about it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Raphael. What some use cases? How do you use automation, AI, Gen AI?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to get back quickly to the CSRD. It is really, big for many companies. We are a Swiss company, but yet, we are a major company with actually significant business in European countries, and therefore we are subject to CSRD as well. and we are actually for 25, because we are not as big as Air France. But it's very important for us. I don't know if some of you know Arnica, the plant Arnica. Can you raise your hand?
Oh, wow.
Oh, fantastic. So, for us, Arnica, we use the Arnica plant. It's a wild plant, and we harvest it in the wild. And it's called Arnica montana because it grows in the mountain. But actually, when people think about climate, we are running short of Arnica montana because actually of the climate, of the global climate change. So it's very close to us, right? And it's one key ingredient for our massage oil that the handball team in France use and won the championship in Europe. So, but so it's very important for us, right? And we, even so, it's 1 year later, we are already working on it. Veleda has issued for the past 20 years. We don't issue annual reports. We are a privately owned company, but we issue a sustainability report. So for the past 20 years, actually, we have been talking about our waste, our recycling program, our partnership with farmers, the way we develop our product, and the way we, our labor force, and pretty much all of the components of CSRD. So we will, move into this more compliance topic, And what's interesting actually is that it's moving from the sustainability team to the finance team now, because auditors are, involved, and now it's going to be audited and so on. So just to make the point here, and in terms of AI, we do the same. We try to generate use case again to make this technology more concrete for people. So, be it in accounting, be it in the cash flow forecast, be it in payroll management. So in taxes, in many of those areas for finance where you've got like repetitive, tedious tasks between different systems, you need to manage data. We want to try to see how we can use AI to make the life of everyone a bit simpler and to free up time, for real, meaningful connection and value added, right? Because if you think of what's really the core of at least in finance, but a finance professional is to connect the dots, right? It's to reach out to the sales team, to reach out to the marketing team, and to connect the dots better, faster than AI, because it's not even in the data yet, right? It's to go ahead. So for us, it's really create use case, as many as possible, get people to learn the technology, to be familiar with the technology, to remove this, kind of bad rep. Here we've got, obviously many of us are convinced and early adopters, if I can say, but it's not the case at all for many of the population. There is still reluctance. There is still this, mystery. What is it? It's a black box, where is my job, and so on. So that's what we are trying to do, right? Get the people accustomed to the technology, get them to use, solve real problem, and move, in small steps, I would say, but maybe to make it more tangible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to your point, we CFOs, they still are not very much into AI, and contrary to other function or Gen AI, contrary to other function of companies. So why so? What's the problem with AI that CFOs don't like?
Where do I begin? So I would
data.
say, so certainly data, I think, has historically been a concern, and frankly, data quality is not a new issue. It's just become accentuated with artificial intelligence. Because if you're going to train whatever form of AI you use, and by the way, all AI is not equal, right? So again, if we kind of come back to the generative AI, in my opinion, and my panelists may have a different view, and it'd be great if they do and can share that. But for me, Gen AI is really an interface into a technology that previously wasn't seen to be accessible, right? So it's what created that user connection, whether you do it in the form of Q&A or however it's done. So to me, that's just a user experience. But what's important is what sits underneath that, and what kind of AI is being used underneath that, whether it's causal AI, whether that includes explanatory AI to say, hey, I'm recommending this for you, and here's the basis for my recommendation. So removing that whole idea, as Raphael talked about, of the black box, that's really important. And that's where CFOs either get comfortable or they get quite uncomfortable. If they can't explain it, they don't like it. If they don't like it, it doesn't get used. It's really as simple as that. If they can start to understand the technology and they can see that it's reliable, they can query it, they can replicate it, all of a sudden it becomes a very interesting tool because their mind shifts very, very quickly to this is going to be a useful tool for productivity, whether it's efficiency, effectiveness, whatever the case may be. And that's been the historical reluctance of CFOs. They're not necessarily first adopters because, rightly or wrongly, and I am one as well, we're risk averse. I'm kind of comfortable being risk averse because it's safer, right? We're there to protect the organization. We're there to be a steward of the organization. So when we talk about these new technologies, if you're talking to your CFO about it or you're being spoken to as the CFO, ask the questions around how do I get comfortable with this? How do I understand it? How do I know I can rely on it? What went into creating the algorithm? What data did you use? What assumptions did you make? And I'll give you one very quick, simple example. One of the things that I do is I do a lot of public interest work on sustainability topics and the convergence of AI. And one that we're looking at the moment is all about human rights, which is quite relevant to CSRD, and it's specifically on forced labor and child labor specifically. And it's how do we use causal AI to help address this issue from a multi-stakeholder perspective. And one of the things that we hadn't thought about, and it's just one simple example, is when a tool is trained, there are a bunch of assumptions that go into the training of that tool, for example. So you might say, okay, if we've got a situation of, let's say, debt bondage, which is basically when someone is in a role because they owe a debt, for example, for a recruitment fee, which most people in the world would say, but doesn't the organization pay the recruitment fee? Yes, in many parts of the world that is true, but it's not true everywhere. And in countries that are already vulnerable, the individuals have to pay it. So they effectively become trapped in the role because they're repaying this debt over years. And you start to wonder, okay, well, what are the financial indicators that go into that? Now, if we think about it from a privileged life perspective, we've got an experience, we've got a lens through which we think about things. And what became important in terms of training this AI was bringing in voices that had a completely different life experience. So one of the things that we did is we actually have been working with a survivor group. Now, this is a not-for-profit group that help individuals who have been victim of human trafficking or of forced labor. And although it's very difficult to hear their story, it's incredibly important to understand it, because that perspective needs to go into training the AI. So if a recommendation is going to come out, it's got a multi-dimensional perspective and a fuller perspective than just the one that we might do if you come, for example, from a privileged background. So just one very simple example, it's that kind of thing that causes anxiety for CFOs when they don't understand what went into it to ultimately help me get comfortable with the output.
Okay, that's the first one. Okay, Wouter, do you trust your data?
Well, maybe I first wanted to maybe add one small thing to what David has said, because I recognize what you're like. Also from a CFO investment point of view, what we see is that, and when we were building our AI strategy, is that we said we really want that organization, as we believe that potentially is there to experiment, to test, to learn to create an environment where AI has a prominent place in the organization. But we also said it's very hard right now to understand what is going to be the winning technology. Of course, everybody talks about OpenAI, ChatGPT. So for us, that flexibility is very important. So any solutions we build, we want that solution to be still flexible when it comes to the models. And we also see that there are different models out there, which have different, let's say, specific benefits. Second, what we see is that I talked to you a little bit earlier about those 4 pillars, but that a lot of use cases are actually quite similar in nature. When you have different operating companies, you have different business entities. So for us, next to that flexibility, multiplication is very important. So we said also from a financial point of view, it's very important that when we build use cases, that we constantly look: is there a multiplication possible for a variety of use cases? And I know if you go downstairs, there are plenty of companies out there trying to sell their solutions. But this is also for me one of the pitfalls, and this is also what I'm warning our CFOs for their final decision making on investment for, is that we should not end up with a whole scala of different solutions which are all standalone, but constantly keep in mind that we want to have that multiplication and replication of these trained models possible. And so that's a sort of the core of our investment strategy. Then to your question with regards to, do I trust the data which comes, as I already explained in the beginning, for us it's crucial when it comes to passenger data, when it comes to safety, anything with regards to the flight operations. It's a zero error game, right? There we absolutely need to be sure. What I've seen and what I also get as feedback from our technical teams is, to be honest, there is quite a bit of, particularly in those training and testing phases, quite some noise, hallucinations in those models. So, can we fully trust those outcomes for decision making? I think you first need to rigidly test. We have, for example, right now in the finance domain, a use case running to have AI support our sort of currency prediction. We have a lot of different currencies, revenue, income streams, costs, for example, for fuel, and we run those models. We try to see if it does predict better than our existing, and then we sort of compare the results with actual performance without taking decisions yet. But eventually, the objective is, when we have that level of trust and maturity there, that this AI solution will replace the existing, more traditional process. But it requires absolutely rigid testing, and there are indeed. I think you constantly have to reflect and still have a human factor. Reviewing the output, so it can be, but probably in more advanced stages than where we are today, that becomes less relevant. But today, that's absolutely crucial.
Okay, Raphael,
yes,
about data, can you add something about data, and maybe we can look into what are the other issues with embarking with AI and automation, but on data.
Yeah. So I'll go back to the justice case that you gave, David, at the beginning, right? With this case where actually the brief was done with the use of OpenAI, but a bit too fast. So the trust was 100%, and the case was lost because it was terrible, right? And I've tried to do forecasting with the same, AI tool, and the results was not great either. So I don't trust, but because I don't think, in fact, the question is whether you trust or not. It's whether it's useful, or whether it can accelerate your thinking or not, right? And for that, I do think it does accelerate your thinking. So that's why I'd like more people to use it, more people to figure out how to use it. But actually, we always think of data, so we always think of forecasting, we always think of sales and operating plans or things like that. But even in marketing, right? Because you can really cross different fields with AI. So that's what is interesting. Now, no, we don't trust it, right? And we don't trust it because there is a hallucination, there is, and there is not the creativity that you bring to the work as well, right? So, but it's an accelerator. Do I wish, as an engineer and as a finance person, I would love to have it, be better, more efficient, and yes, the quality of data be better. I don't think we are there yet. I've not seen it. And in terms of implementation, I think it's a bit what I was referring to. It's about, as a CFO, I see my job as how do I align the financial capital and the human capital. And that's only when I've got a great combination that we have productivity and growth and value creation, right? Human capital and financial capital. and my human capital is, amount of people and the quality and skills and competencies. And, we need to help those people to grow, develop, and learn. And, for any company, I think we need to consider this type of technology because, it's going to accelerate the productivity, and it's a key challenge. But also to train and develop our people, our employees, because we want to make sure that they are, on the top of their competency and their ability level, right? And that's what I was saying, small wins, convincing people, it needs to help them, it needs to be very concrete. And I would love to get, people in my accounting team, developing their own bots because they can train them, and then they can see that it's helpful for them.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's true that when we run surveys within our CFO organization, we realize that the people are still worried about automation, about AI. So, and you have already mentioned it a bit. So, for yourself, for example, what do you do to actually maybe you can go further? Do you have any recommendations on how to embark people? Because we know that maybe like the vast majority of projects of automation or transformation, they don't go far because of people being scared and so on. So what do you do? What recommendations? Yeah. And just as a final word before your reply, after banks and insurance, the finance population has been the next one to take on automation because we have huge teams and we are all looking for efficiency, productivity, and so on. So we are very good at test for these new tools. So, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Armand. So I always say, we don't need to, I spend a lot of time in the US. In the US, you play baseball. And if you're very good at baseball, you know that you just need to be able to hit the ball like 30% of the time, right? And I always say to my team, if we can just take better decision, 5% better decision, it makes a huge difference. So we don't need to always be right, perfect, but if you can improve by our decision making by 5%, it makes a huge difference. And that's what I'm looking for, that everyone in the company can take decisions that are 5% better. And if we do that as a company, we'll be so much better. So now our approach is not to have like a big top-down initiative project, a bit lenient approach. It's really from the ground up. So first to give the tool to as many people as possible. So we're doing what many companies are doing, I think. It's to bring, Gen AI to on a self-service in a safe, private way, so that people can start to, play with that. So they feel safe, they feel they can do it, and they feel they will not put, any company data at risk, right? Then we want to, next we'll organize a competition, to make it fun as well, to have use cases and have teams and so that we can make it visible. Also, we want to make sure that the words of the people who are concerned for their jobs, concerned for their privacy, concerned for anything, can actually, voice that and can be heard by the leadership, and that we can answer that and find ways to, solve that, right? So it's more from the ground up. And then, frankly, I hope we'll find, great use case, and that we can then, a bit like Wouters was talking about, scale that up, right? Because when I think of inventory management, I see plenty of application as a finance guy. When I see of operation scheduling, I see plenty of application. When I think of, talent management, development, I see plenty of application. But it needs to come from the people, and that's that's our approach.
What do you do with your people? How do you sell all this automation and AI to your people?
I think it's very much in line with what Bref already mentioned. I think first of all, I think it's important to have a clear strategy around AI from a company point of view. Then As I said, we have the governance. You need to make sure that you have the technical capabilities to be able to have whenever people want to put forward use cases to test, to learn, and finally make a decision whether or not you want to really industrialize and train the models. You have to build a sort of a portfolio to have a sort of clear visibility also from a sort of bottom up, what are potential use cases. Also in a large company like Air France KLM, where you have silos sometimes in the organization, how do you ensure that you don't invent the wheel multiple times? So we have sharing sessions between those teams, and then finally we have a roadmap and a portfolio of use cases where we constantly there are decision-making moments where you reprioritize. So you make sure then that the leadership is engaged, and then finally it's about the engagement of your staff population. And for that, roadshows are being held. There are events organized by the data and AI team where you see there's a lot of interest from all different backgrounds, people within the organization, and I think that also helps when they see what kind of use cases are out there, what the potential is. That it probably makes it less scary, but. For sure, there are concerns to be addressed when it comes to social consequences. But it's also for me, for a transformation point of view, very very clear. It's not necessarily if you want to make this kind of investment, in the end you want to have also a return on the investment, right? And that can come from better output, but yeah, also productivity use cases are part of that.
Yeah. Okay. Before David, you comment on the people, your recommendations. In finance, we are not well paid, and as we all know, and we see now we are used to working with processes of these old tools, ERPs, and so on. Now we are talking about data. We are talking it's very complex. We're talking about AI, Gen AI. So we have to bring these data engineer, data scientists, and these guys, they are paid well. Right? They have no clue about finance, but they are paid well. So what can we do to bring them together so that, of course, you can raise the salaries of accountants, but it's not enough. So any comments?
All good questions. So I would say a couple of things that are important in my experience. So beyond what the two of you said, which I absolutely support, I think companies that do this well have a culture of, I think you used the word, Raphael, safety. And what I mean by safety is that employees can look at the technology and not see it as a threat to their job. In other words, they've got retraining programs, they've got career paths, those career paths evolve. And they don't see, therefore, the technology as a threat. When you don't see something as a threat, you tend to get kind of interested and excited about it. And you want to work with it, you want to play with it. So I think the big challenge for an organization is how do you create an environment and a culture where it isn't perceived as a threat to my job, to my livelihood, to my family, because we're all human beings, we extend. So I think that's the one thing I would say around this is really, really important. And from there, once that threat's removed, the collaboration, to your point, with different functional expertise is not an issue. It's just not. Because now all of a sudden you're working as a team saying, okay, how do we solve this problem? Because each of the individuals within that group bring a different perspective. And all perspectives are equal and important. And frankly, I think when it comes to salaries, they normalize no matter what. The market makes those decisions. And individuals within those roles can vote with their feet. So ultimately, organizations that want to retain talent, as we heard earlier with the minister, you pay them properly. And that's how you end up retaining the talent and keeping it. But I think the key thing really, really is create safety. Because without that, all of the fancy words in the world, all of the, that's going to make your job so much better, when you've got that worry at the back of your mind, is not going to help. And then you have this really bizarre behavior sometimes of individuals that almost thwart the exercise. It's a really strange phenomenon where it's almost like, I'm not going to give my 100% to that. We'll just make it look good. And that's actually not helpful. So I think it's just rethinking how we do it, and we create that level of safety, and ultimately promote and encourage, whether it's through competition. Some organizations like competitions, and I've certainly worked for organizations that promote competition. Others don't. I think it's more about how do you reward good outcomes, but how do you reward the whole team for the good outcome, not just one individual? Because that's ultimately how you foster, again, people wanting to work together and do something more. But it's also, the last thing I'll say on the matter is, don't force people. You know, think back to when you were teenagers. For some of us, it's a very long time ago. For others, it's much more recent. But think when you were a teenager and one of your parents said, you must do this. And your thought was, really? Why must I? And then all of a sudden we get rebellious. Oh, I must not do that. But it's the same here. If we promote an organization where we say, hey, look, these are the things we can play with, and we've created that level of safety, people naturally want to do it. Like teenagers, it's almost like reverse psychology, right? You almost do the opposite so that you, in an indirect way, promote the thing you really wanted in the first place. And that's what we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask you, these things, they get very technical. So who should be in charge of digital transformation? Is it business? Is it finance? Is it IT? So in your case, because you are more operational, so who is in charge of digital? Is it IT or finance?
So I'm not saying whether this should be the standard setup, of course, but the way we run it is that we have an IT organization which is responsible for the infrastructure, the sort of data layers, and in the end, let's say the front-end applications. We're in the whole transgression right now from having everything on premise in our own data centers to moving that to cloud-based solutions. Then when it comes to the digitalization, so we used to have a digital studio and a digital factory separate as a standalone unit, and then trying to have those businesses engage and then be also sort of a linking pin between the businesses and the IT organization. But I think initially it really helped to create a kind of a digital mindset, to have some more manual processes converted. But in the end, we found out that it was too far away from the business, and very often it was pretty hard for them to make a solution which also where this change really sticks. So what we have done is that on one hand, that's what I explained earlier, we have created a data and AI office to have, because we believe that data should not be stuck in the silos of the organization. So have a central organization for that, so that the data for decision making is seamlessly, that is the ultimate goal, it's not yet the case, but eventually it's more seamlessly available for wherever it's needed. So you will still have data owners within the business. We have to make sure that the data is accurate. But then you have a central organization for the governance, the management of that data, and eventually the applications, for example, with artificial intelligence. And for the rest, the digitalization, we do in very close proximity to the business. So, for example, myself, I have a small central transformation organization, but then we have transformation teams which are sort of constantly driving continuous improvement, continuous change, including digitalization, in very close proximity with the business, which can tap into central resources within my organization. So it's digitalization is happening in close proximity to the business. By some dedicated persons reporting in that business line with a functional link to our central organization, and then with a central organization organized around data and AI, which has a link with the IT organization but is not part of it.
Raphael?
Yeah, so who should be in charge, right? So I think it depends. In our case, Veleda is a medium-sized company. Very international, but medium-sized. In those cases, oftentimes the CFO is in charge of IT, oftentimes
that's easier, right?
HR as well. Yeah. But actually, what's interesting, Armand, In my case, I've got IT in my remit, but we decided to bring digital transformation and data closer to me because it's really important, and I think it's important in terms of stakeholder management as well, right? So my job is not the one of a technical expert, but it's the one of a champion for change, champion for technology adoption, champion for learning and bringing that, outside, inside view, right? So at the executive committee, we are four, and I'm the flag bearer I carry the flag for technology transformation. Yeah, that's the way we're organized. I think it's the case in many medium-sized companies.
Yeah, it's true that in larger companies, to avoid the fight between CFOs and CIOs, they have created the role of CTO, Chief Transformation Officer, or Chief Data Officer, right? So what do you see in a few words?
It's a good question. I actually see a very similar model where there's a central digital transformation or kind of functional group, but they program manage. And they program manage all of the incentives throughout the organization from a resource allocation perspective, make sure they've got the resources, make sure they've got the support. To your point, there's a central hub with central expertise, so almost think of them as deep support. So it's a nice blend of having people within the individual sites, the individual locations or functional areas where they're needed, but having access to the broader program, which is run on behalf of the whole company, right? Because somebody at the end of the day has to look at this holistically and not just individually, functionally, because otherwise you could easily have one function that does everything perfectly for them, and it creates chaos everywhere else because it's just not joined up or it doesn't work with the overall strategy. So I think it's a blend of both that I've seen.
Thank you. So maybe we can take one or two questions. So while you're asked, oh wow, already. Yes, please.
Yes, I have one question regarding risk management. I understand there are plenty of opportunities related to big data, generative AI, and so on. But in terms of risk, are you more audited through COVID-19 or more tools like that in order to make sure that there is an external control on the risk that will happen also due to this new environment?
So risk mitigation.
So I would say risk mitigation is a significant area of focus, and certainly the pandemic accelerated it like probably nobody's business. So I think that there is a significant realization of business continuity. Just to give you some sense of scale, for example, in Canada, I am Canadian as well as being British, but in Canada, for example, very large geographic country, if you can imagine, it's huge. When they had to all of a sudden switch overnight, like most of us did when everything was locked down, they struggled terribly when it came to remote connectivity. Imagine. So it really shifted the focus of organizations incredibly quickly to, if we don't deal with this problem, we're potentially not going to have a business that survives. So for them, I think it's one example of many, but since then we're seeing it much more with climate, we're seeing it with AI, uses of AI, but also the risks of AI. AI can take companies down just as fast as it can make them, and if it's not done properly. So these are very real risks. Cybersecurity is another one. You can imagine if you all of a sudden heard, which I would never wish on KLM, Air France KLM, imagine there was a cybersecurity threat. And all of a sudden, you've got these planes in the air, and someone could somehow, which we know can't happen because it's not connected in that way, but imagine they could somehow take control of the plane that you happen to be in. I mean, how freaky would that be? That's a very real example of a threat that if there's enough connectivity and not enough security, things can go wrong very quickly. Or think about, what happens if somehow there's a hack, there's a product configuration change, that somehow makes its way out to production and no one notices. All of a sudden, the products you all come to love and use have something toxic in them. Now, yes, I'm giving extreme examples, but this is the kind of risk management that I think is very real and companies are actively thinking about and working on.
Yeah, it's a big topic of discussion within our organization,
Absolutely.
Associations. Join us to share. So we had one question. No, okay, this one. Okay, question.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. So indeed, we are as part of the technical abilities which we have defined in that data and AI office. We have made a clear distinction what kind of use cases have to be run on premise with a private instance. So we're at the moment deploying the ChatGPT Azure model on premise. So of course there is the obvious whenever it will entail sensitive data around passengers, about our network, our pricing, these kind of competitive or from a GDPR point of view sensitive data when it comes to. But whenever it is more public available information, we also believe that instead of constantly retraining our own model, that it can be useful to use models also which are running, for example, on servers outside of Europe. There has been also a whole discussion and debates about that. So, for example, when it comes to the IT coding, more generic coding, maybe not some kind of competitive advantage kind of own build solution, but more generic coding. For that, for example, we have now authorized the use of a public AI model. So our IT developers are using that just to generate generic code to be faster in their coding. I can share with you offline. We have a beautiful diagram which explains exactly for which activities you can go have to go on premise, or for which not. And for example, what I was also explaining earlier about as part of that governance in that act. So whenever you open the private instance, you have to go to all kind of this security disclaimers, making very clear if you want to use it for ad hoc requests or for API connections, you can only do it for specific types of use cases.
Okay, you see, the CFOs, they can become very technical, and we could discuss how we have to change the profile of the CFOs. And by the way, we have to stop here because there is another panel after hours, after this one. But we have another panel on finance around these topics tonight at 5. Demo 1 room, so if you're welcome to join us so we can discuss further. Sorry, we have to stop here. I would like to thank my panelists. Please, a round of applause. And if you have any questions, we can discuss outside. Thank you very much.